On today's show, contenders or pretenders of the Eastern Conference. Are the New York Knicks the biggest threat to the defending champion Boston Celtics? It's all coming up on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time because, look, I don't know about you, I love going to live events. It could be sports, could be going to a baseball game, basketball game, could be a concert, whatever. There's nothing like it, right? Being in that live atmosphere, it's incredible. And Game Time is the best way to do that. It's the best way to buy your tickets for any kind of event. And Game Time even has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different ticketing offers. Look, and I don't know about you, my least favorite thing when I'm trying to buy tickets usually is you're going through and at the very, very end of the process, you get hit with like the digital handling fees and the service charges and all that. You don't get that with Game Time. They give you their all-in price up front, so you know exactly how much you're paying from the very beginning. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Knicks, Alex Wolfe. You can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Knicks here as we are tackling contenders or pretenders of the Eastern Conference. Alex, we're going to start right there. Why should the New York Knicks be considered legitimate contenders going into this next season?
I think if you look at their body of work last year, I mean, they end up a 50-win team. It came right down to the wire, but 2 seed is a 2 seed. You know, whether it happened on the final day of the season or not, they were the second and the only other team in the Eastern Conference to win 50 or more games last year. The continuity, I think, is really big. I think that when you look at, I mean, the two hot teams that everybody wants to discuss the merits of contender or pretender in the East this year. Boston obviously is one. Milwaukee mostly is staying the same. So, you kind of just base that off of, can they stay healthy, this, that, the other. But the Sixers and the Knicks made great strides to get better this offseason. And I think that the huge difference between the two of them, when you're talking about who's potentially, in the pole position right now, would be the Knicks basically taking the same exact team and running it back plus Mikal Bridges, whereas the Sixers kind of blew everything up. So I think that's like one of the main things where I feel more confident in the Knicks, like to say repeat as the second seed again, potentially be able to threaten Boston, all this other stuff, is that continuity. Like they have this team that knows each other so well. Obviously Isaiah Hartenstein, losing him, I think is probably a bigger deal than maybe people realize at like a national level. He was really, really key to what they did down the stretch of last season. But if they can count on Mitchell Robinson to stay healthy, which hopefully that's the case, and if Precious Achiuwa can step up like he did at times last year, plus if they experiment a little more with small ball and with running OG Anunoby out there as your de facto 5-man on defense, to do a little rim protection from time to time and lean on Julius Randle's rebounding prowess, or have him out there with Precious and, see if that works, whatever. I think there's a way for the Knicks to absorb that loss of Hartenstein. A lot of it hinges on Mitchell Robinson staying mostly healthy throughout the year. So I guess we'll see how that goes. That's been a not exactly a safe bet. So I think if there was one thing that I would say, and maybe this is going to be your next question, but one thing that it keeps them from potentially being a legit contender, it might be that center spot. But otherwise, I mean, they're just so deep at the guard positions, at the forward positions, just everything other than that center spot. I feel like they just have championship level depth. And I really think that there's a chance that they win like potentially upwards of 60 games this year and could maybe even push to try to press Boston a little bit if things go right, because you know that Thibs is going to try to get as much regular season success as possible out of this team as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at now. I think a couple things need to break right, but you could say that about almost any team that has title aspirations. And if they do break right, then I think the Knicks have a real shot at it this year.
You didn't just steal my next question. You stole my next like 3 questions, man. I was ready to rock and roll over here, and you're like, you hit the Hartenstein angle, and you no. So we'll just call it quits. We'll wrap this thing up. No, look. So first of all, I also think obviously losing Hartenstein is a big one, and you brought up a really interesting point there that I am curious to pick your brains about a little bit further. Though is the Mitchell Robinson angle, right? Like how much do you expect him to lean on Mitchell Robinson versus going into that small ball dynamic? The fact that we even saw in the playoffs this last season, right? OG Anunoby working against a Joel Embiid, right? Like that was almost like akin to when the Warriors would roll out their death ball lineup back during the peak Warriors era, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's something that Gavin and I talk about all the time on our show, and a lot of Knicks fans are talking about now that the Knicks have sort of, once they re-signed Precious Achiuwa, that was them effectively waving the white flag for now on trying to find another like true center to back up Mitch there. I do think that in Tibbs's ideal world, Mitch is still playing like 30 minutes a night, if not more. And Precious, maybe then would absorb like 10 minutes, and then you maybe roll with 8 minutes of small ball. And it's kind of funny because I think that a lot of people, Knicks fans included, and it was properly founded for the first couple years with Tibbs, because he was, I think, a lot more stubborn then and has shown a lot of growth late in his career as a coach. But I think that a lot of people would be like, well, I'll believe it when I see it, as far as him going small. But there were certain other things, like last year, it was like the Knicks sort of forced his hand roster construction wise by saying, okay, we traded Obi Toppin and we're not going to sign another true backup four. So you can either play Josh Hart at the four, or I guess try to roll out two centers. Like, what else is your plan here? And he did conform and rolled out Josh Hart at the four. And so I think that maybe this is the Knicks front office too, sort of trying to force his hand a little bit once they realized like, hey, Walker Kessler or whoever isn't available for a fair amount. We're gonna make sure that you run OG Anunoby out there now as like the de facto five for a handful of minutes per game, and let's see how that works. Because Precious is not going to be that perfect answer all the time. He's a little up and down as far as how he plays. At his best, he's done really well for the Knicks. At his worst, he's been, not able to stay on the floor, especially in limited minutes. So we'll see how that goes. But I think that I think that's going to be a big part of them potentially, finding a new gear that allows them to reach that sort of championship level play, because I think every championship team needs a few different looks that they can throw out there. You can't just play the same way all the time and expect to win a championship. But that said, I think if you ask Tibbs like what his ideal is, it would be, I want Mitchell Robinson opening games. I want him closing halves. I want this team to function best with Mitchell Robinson out there, because he loves having that dominant drop defensive center that can, completely wall off the paint and then let the perimeter guys kind of cook as far as, playing the passing lanes and stuff like that. So that's definitely his ideal, but we'll see if that comes to be or not this year.
You mentioned kind of the five spot, and we spent a little bit of time talking about that so far as potentially a point of weakness for this Knicks team. Is there anything else aside from health being a factor? Because any team could say health as the biggest point of weakness. When you look up and down at this Knicks team, any major point of weakness?
I wouldn't call it a major point of weakness, but maybe something that people go to as a talking point would be the backup point guard spot, sort of. I think that there's this interesting,
like the fall off when Brunson's not on the court, essentially.
Yeah, like I think there's this sort of interesting thing right now where you've got a weird mix of guys behind him. So you have Cam Payne, who they signed for a veterans minimum deal, who is a pretty experienced, good NBA backup guard. That definitely is the most I won't say the most point guardy, but the most experienced, like, quote, true point guard that they have on the roster in NBA service time. Then you have Tyler Kolek, who they just drafted, who they clearly really like a lot. They gave him the biggest second round contract in NBA history. He signed for 4 years. Like, they were clearly like super excited that he made it to them, and very quick to invest in him and say, this is a guy that we want on this team for a number of years to see how he does. And he had a really nice summer league, especially as far as like how he might fit with the bench unit. He's going to be surrounded by shooting on that bench unit. I think there's a real chance for him to find some minutes there. But I think the main guy is Deuce McBride, and I think the big question has been like it's very similar to the Emmanuel Quickly discourse that there was for a long time with the Knicks, during before he got traded, which is he a point guard or not? And like a lot of people are like, that's silly. It doesn't matter. He's just a talented basketball player. I think that Deuce is less point guard talented than Emmanuel Quickly, but I think that with that bench unit, it won't matter as much. So I think you can probably get away with, if Brunson's going to play like 35 minutes a game, if you got to play Deuce 13 out there without Brunson, I think that's okay. I also think that they play great together, so it would be a shame if they never really got to play together as a result. But I think you'll be all right with that because Dante DiVincenzo can bring the ball down and set up a play. Josh Hart can certainly do that and proved pretty good at that during the postseason and a lot of the regular season last year. And then you also might just they're probably going to run a nine-man rotation again, which means there's going to be a decent amount of time we're going to have Julius Randle out there with those three guys. Because I think Julius Randle will be the guy that they lean on sort of to stagger his time with Brunson from time to time and have Randle sort of run things with the bench unit and, be the distributor for that group too. So I guess maybe like on paper, that's one thing that looks maybe a little worrisome is like, okay, who do you have be that like quote backup point guard? But I feel like that will play itself out in such a way that it won't be too big of an issue other than that center issue as far as like things to worry about with this team going into the year.
Looking at kind of the teams projecting to be at the top of the Eastern Conference this next season, how would you power rank these four teams? Celtics, Bucks, 76ers, Knicks. Go.
I think Celtics, unfortunately, Knicks, Sixers, Bucks, I think right now. I guess I just don't quite buy it with the Bucks as of this second, like they had the team that they have now last year. And I think that GTJ is a great pickup for them. So maybe that's the swing thing that kind of elevates them. Like it's crazy that they got him on a veterans minimum. Like that is just an absolute heist considering the talent level of scorer that he is. But with them, they're just so fragile. Like they're living on a real fine line, like at all times because of the age of their core, the fact that like if Giannis goes down, they're really screwed for an extended period of time. If Dame Lillard gets hurt, they're in rough shape. If Middleton gets hurt, which you kind of just have to assume he's going to only play like 30 games a season at this point, based off past results, like I just feel like there's a very small margin for error for them. Whereas I think the Celtics and the Knicks are the deepest teams, and therefore I think most well equipped to get through the regular season, potentially end with, a good record at the end of the year. And potentially that I think Knicks fans saw over this past year, like even for all the depth they had, sometimes the injuries just catch up to you. I think the Knicks and Celtics are best equipped to deal with all that. Whereas I think the Sixers, for as good as their core three is with Maxey and Embiid and George, I like some of the depth pieces that they've been able to fill out the roster with, but none of them are particularly moving me in a way that like the Celtics and Knicks depth is, combined with the fact that you also have two guys on the Sixers that are also injury risks with George and Embiid being the hugest one. So that, I think that's what sort of leads to my rationale there. But I think the Sixers overall, weirdly, even though I think that Embiid is probably the biggest injury risk of all those guys in those bottom two teams, I think that they're a little less on the edge just because I think Maxey and George could carry you a little better than like the Bucks core could without Giannis. Um, so I think that that's where they're at. But those two are almost interchangeable to me because in many ways I think they have a lot of the same weaknesses as far as what could bite them over the course of a full 82 game season plus playoffs. So I think that's why I'm at that. So it's sort of like Celtics, Knicks 1-2, and then a little bit of a delta, and then Sixers and Bucks for me.
Are the Knicks the biggest threat to the Boston Celtics this next season? How do they stack up compared to the rest of the Eastern Conference? You're going to have us covered for all that and so much more over at Locked On Knicks. Alex, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Of course, anytime.